I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would cheat on his wife. Emily and I had been together for over 10 years, and we had built a life together, a home, kids, everything. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always believed in us. That was until they moved in. The house next door had been empty for months, and then one day, a moving truck showed up. Emily and I were curious about our new neighbors, so we walked over to introduce ourselves. When the door opened, I was not prepared for what I saw. Two women stood in the doorway, identical twins. Tall, athletic, with striking blue eyes and dark, glossy hair that fell perfectly over their shoulders. They were the kind of beautiful that made you do a double take, and I found myself momentarily lost for words. "Hi, we're Lucy and Lydia," one of them said, smiling warmly. "We just moved in." I blinked, trying to regain my composure. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Jason, and this is my wife, Emily." Emily, always the polite one, stepped forward with a bright smile. "It's so nice to meet you both. If you need anything while you're settling in, just let us know." The twins exchanged a glance, then Lucy, at least I thought it was Lucy, spoke. "Thanks so much. We appreciate that." After a bit of small talk, we left them to finish unpacking. But as we walked back home, I couldn't stop thinking about them. There was something about the way they looked at me, playful, almost mischievous. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I felt a strange pull I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, we saw the twins often. They would wave as they jogged past our house, stop by for a quick chat when Emily and I were outside, or show up at neighborhood events. They were friendly, fun, and easy to talk to. Emily seemed to enjoy their company, and before long we were spending more time with them. At first it was all innocent, but then things started to shift. One afternoon, Emily had gone out to run errands, and I was working in the garage when Lucy and Lydia showed up. They were dressed in tight workout clothes, their hair tied back, glistening with sweat from their run. "Hey, Jason," Lucy said, leaning against the doorframe with a grin. "Working hard." I wiped my hands on a rag, feeling a little flustered. "Yeah, just trying to fix this old bike." "Need some help?" Lydia asked, stepping inside the garage without waiting for an answer. I hesitated, but before I could say anything, they were both standing beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat from their bodies. The air between us suddenly felt charged, and I realized, with a jolt of panic, that I was in dangerous territory. "It's fine, really," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've got it under control." But they didn't leave. Lucy picked up a wrench from the workbench, twirling it in her hand as she looked at me with a sly smile. "You don't mind a little company, do you?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "No, I guess not." For the next half hour, we talked and laughed while I pretended to focus on the bike. But my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about how close they were, how their laughter seemed to fill the garage, how their smiles seemed to linger on me a little too long. When they finally left, I was relieved. But that relief was quickly replaced by something else. Guilt. I knew I had let myself get too comfortable, too close. And it wasn't just with one of them. It was with both. After that day, things escalated faster than I could have imagined. The twins started coming over more often when Emily wasn't around. At first, it was innocent enough, just friendly visits. They'd bring coffee, sit in the backyard while I worked, and chat about life. But every time they came over, there was an unspoken tension between us, something simmering just beneath the surface. Then one evening, when Emily was out of town visiting her parents, they invited me over to their place for a drink. "You've been working so hard lately," Lydia said, her voice playful. "Come relax with us for a bit." I hesitated, knowing I should say no. But the temptation was too strong, and before I knew it, I was sitting on their couch, a glass of whiskey in hand, surrounded by the two of them. They sat on either side of me, their legs brushing against mine, their voices soft and teasing. We talked, laughed, and drank, and with each passing minute, the boundaries that had once seemed so clear began to blur. At one point, Lucy leaned in closer, her breath warm against my neck. "You're really fun to be around, Jason," she whispered, her fingers brushing against my arm. I froze, my heart racing. This was it. This was the moment where I should have gotten up, walked out, and never looked back. But I didn't, couldn't. Before I knew what was happening, Lydia was leaning in from the other side, her lips brushing against my ear. "We've always liked you," she said softly. "Both of us." The room seemed to spin as the reality of what was happening sank in. They weren't just flirting. This wasn't just a game. They were both coming on to me at the same time. I should have stopped it. I should have said no. But instead, I let it happen. What started as a kiss quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Their hands were on me, their bodies pressed against mine, and I lost myself in the moment. All the guilt, all the reasons why this was wrong, seemed to disappear as I gave in to the temptation. It was thrilling, exhilarating, and completely reckless. But in that moment, I didn't care. When it was over, the reality of what I had done hit me like a ton of bricks. I sat on the edge of their bed, my head in my hands, while Lucy and Lydia lay beside me, their breathing still heavy. The guilt came crashing down on me, overwhelming and suffocating. What had I done? How had I let this happen? I stood up quickly, pulling on my clothes, my mind racing with panic. "I need to go," I muttered, my voice hoarse. The twins exchanged a glance. Then Lydia sat up, her expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not okay. I can't believe I just did this." Lucy stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my arm. "Jason, it's okay. No one has to know." But that was the problem. I would know. I had betrayed Emily in the worst possible way, and there was no undoing it. Without another word, I left their house, my mind spinning with regret and shame. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, and now I was trapped in a web of lies that I didn't know how to escape. When I got home, I sat in the dark for hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried to justify it, the truth was painfully clear. I had cheated on my wife, not just with one woman but with two, at the same time. The next few days were a blur of guilt and anxiety. Every time I looked at Emily, I felt sick to my stomach. She had no idea what I had done, and I didn't know if I could ever bring myself to tell her. The twins acted like nothing had happened. They still smiled and waved when they saw me, still chatted with Emily like everything was normal. But every time I saw them, I was reminded of my betrayal. I tried to avoid them, tried to focus on my marriage and forget about that night. But the guilt was always there, gnawing at me, reminding me of the mistake I had made. And deep down, I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The days after the affair felt like living in a constant state of anxiety. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how I had gotten to this point. Every glance from Emily, every kiss goodnight, felt like a cruel reminder of the secret I was now carrying. How could I look into her eyes, knowing what I had done? The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating, but I couldn't let her know. I couldn't destroy her with the truth. The twins, Lucy and Lydia, were acting completely normal. That unnerved me even more. I avoided them as much as I could, but it wasn't easy when they lived right next door. They'd still wave or say a casual hello whenever they passed by, but there was always something hidden in their smiles, a subtle reminder of what had happened between us. Every time I saw them, it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know how they could be so calm, how they acted like nothing had changed. Emily remained blissfully unaware. She continued her routines, going to work, taking care of the kids, planning family dinners like always. The thought of what I'd done, and how easily I had betrayed her, made me sick to my stomach. Every day that passed felt like a ticking time bomb, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this secret. One evening, Emily invited the twins over for dinner. "They've been so nice since they moved in," she said with a smile as she set the table. "I thought it'd be good to get to know them better." My heart skipped a beat. The last thing I wanted was to sit across from Lucy and Lydia, pretending everything was normal. But what could I say? If I refused, Emily would get suspicious. So, I forced a smile and nodded, even though my mind was racing with dread. That evening, the twins showed up at our doorstep, looking as effortlessly put together as always. Emily greeted them warmly, offering them drinks and chatting about neighborhood gossip while I tried to avoid eye contact. As we sat down for dinner, I felt like I was in a nightmare, trapped between my wife and the two women I had betrayed her with. "Jason's been so helpful," Lucy said casually, her eyes flicking toward me with a subtle glint. "We're lucky to have such great neighbors." Lydia chimed in, her voice soft and sweet. "Yes, he's always there when we need a hand." I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart pounding in my chest. Were they toying with me, trying to see how much they could get away with? I could barely focus on the conversation, the guilt gnawing at me with every passing minute. Emily, blissfully unaware, laughed and nodded. "He's always been great like that. I'm glad we could be of help while you two settled in." The rest of the dinner felt like torture. Every word, every smile, felt loaded with hidden meaning. I could barely make it through the meal without my mind racing back to that night. I kept waiting for one of the twins to say something, to slip up and let Emily know what had really happened. But they didn't. They kept the conversation light, playful, acting like nothing had changed. When the evening finally ended and they left, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But the relief didn't last long. As soon as Emily closed the door behind them, she turned to me with a warm smile. "They're such sweet girls, aren't they?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, they're great." But inside, I was falling apart. Weeks passed, and though I tried to act normal, the weight of what I had done was eating me alive. The guilt was relentless. I started distancing myself from Emily, not intentionally, but I just couldn't handle the constant reminder of my betrayal. Every time she kissed me or looked at me with that trusting smile, it felt like a punch to the gut. One Saturday morning, I was out mowing the lawn when Lydia came over, casually leaning against the fence that separated our yards. I tensed up the moment I saw her, my hands tightening on the handle of the mower. "Hey, Jason," she said with that same playful smile. "Need a break?" I shut off the mower, wiping the sweat from my forehead as I turned to face her. "What do you want, Lydia?" She raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Can't I just come over and say hi?" I knew there was more to it than that. There always was. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly, glancing toward the house to make sure Emily wasn't watching. Lydia shrugged, stepping closer. "Relax. I just wanted to see how you were doing. You've been avoiding us. Can you blame me?" I hissed, my heart racing. This can't keep happening. I can't. Before I could finish, Lucy appeared next to her, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Jason, you're too tense. We had fun that night. No one's going to find out if we don't say anything." I shook my head, trying to steady my breathing. "It was a mistake. I shouldn't have let it happen. It's over." "Is it?" Lucy asked, her voice soft and teasing. The way they stood there, so calm, so in control, made my skin crawl. They weren't just playing with me, they were testing me, seeing how far they could push before I broke. I was about to tell them to leave, to stop coming around, when Emily stepped outside with a cup of coffee in hand. "Hey, you girls again," she called cheerfully. completely unaware of the tension between us. Lydia smiled and waved, while Lucy gave me a knowing look before turning to greet Emily. "Just checking in on Jason. Looks like he's hard at work." Emily laughed. "He's always busy with something." I could barely hold it together as the twins made small talk with Emily. It felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, and any wrong move would send everything crashing down. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly on edge, waiting for the moment when it would all unravel. When the twins finally left, I let out a long, shaky breath. Emily walked over to me, her eyes bright with amusement. "They really seem to like you," she teased, playfully nudging me. I forced a smile, but inside, I was dying. How long could I keep this up? How long could I pretend everything was fine? As the weeks dragged on, the pressure became unbearable. I felt trapped, suffocated by my lies, and no matter how hard I tried to distance myself from the twins, they kept finding ways to insert themselves into my life. They seemed to enjoy the power they had over me, the way they could make me squirm with a single glance or word. One evening, Emily was hosting a dinner party for some of her friends from work. The house was filled with laughter and conversation, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind was spinning, caught between guilt and fear. The twins had RSVP'd for the dinner, and knowing they were going to be there made my skin crawl. When Lucy and Lydia arrived, dressed to perfection and carrying bottles of wine, I felt the familiar surge of panic. They greeted Emily with bright smiles, acting like the perfect guests. But when they looked at me, there was something else in their eyes, something that sent a chill down my spine. As the evening went on, I tried to keep my distance, but it was impossible. Every time I turned around, one of the twins was there, brushing past me, giving me a knowing look, reminding me of the secret we shared. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself and slipped out to the backyard, desperate for some fresh air. I leaned against the fence, trying to catch my breath, my heart racing with panic. "Jason!" I turned to see Lucy standing in the doorway, her expression calm but serious. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "What are you doing out here?" she asked softly, stepping closer. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice trembling. "This has to stop. It was a mistake, and I can't keep lying to Emily." Lucy's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "You knew what you were doing that night, Jason. We all did. And it wasn't just one of us, it was both. You made a choice." "I was drunk," I muttered, my mind racing with regret. "I wasn't thinking clearly." Lucy shook her head, her voice cold. "You weren't that drunk. You wanted it. Don't pretend otherwise." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right, in a way. I had made a choice, but it was a choice I regretted more than anything. "I'm telling Emily," I said suddenly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I can't live with this anymore. She deserves to know." Lucy's expression changed, her eyes darkening. "You don't want to do that, Jason. Trust me." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Before Lucy could answer, Lydia stepped outside, her face pale, her voice urgent. "You need to get back inside. Now." I turned to look at her, my heart pounding. "Why?" Lydia's eyes darted toward the window. "Emily, she knows." My blood ran cold. Lydia's words hit me like a freight train. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Emily knew? My heart pounded in my chest, and panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm my ability to think straight. "What do you mean she knows?" I whispered, my voice shaky. Lydia glanced back at the house, and Lucy stepped forward, her face tense now, no longer wearing the teasing, confident smile from earlier. "You need to get back inside and talk to her before things get worse," Lucy said, her voice low and serious. I could barely process what was happening. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced myself to walk toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if I was moving toward my own execution. Inside, the lively atmosphere from earlier had disappeared. The guests were still chatting in the dining room, but something was wrong. Terribly wrong. My eyes scanned the room, and then I saw Emily standing in the corner of the kitchen. She was holding her phone, her face pale, her expression blank, but her eyes were filled with something I had never seen before. Rage. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry as I stepped toward her. Emily. She didn't even look up at me. Her fingers tightened around her phone, and for a moment, the room felt like it was closing in on me. The walls, the guests, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. All of it faded as I focused on Emily. "You've been lying to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with venom. "All this time you've been lying." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How had she found out? Had one of the twins said something? Had she overheard us outside? "Emily, please. Let me explain." She cut me off, finally looking up at me with fury blazing in her eyes. "Explain? What is there to explain, Jason? I trusted you. I loved you. And you were sneaking around with them? With both of them?" Her voice cracked as she spat the words out, and I could see the betrayal written across her face. My mind raced, but I knew there was nothing I could say to make this right. The damage had been done. I had destroyed everything. "Emily, I'm so sorry," I whispered, stepping toward her. But she took a step back, her entire body shaking. "How long?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "How long have you been cheating on me with them?" Couldn't lie anymore. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "It was just once," I said, my voice filled with guilt and shame. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was more than a mistake," she snapped, her voice rising. "You didn't just slip up, Jason. You made a choice. A choice to betray me in the worst way possible." Her words cut deep, and I felt my heart break as I watched the pain in her eyes. Emily, the woman I had spent over a decade with, the mother of my children, the person who had been by my side through everything. She was shattered because of me, because of what I had done, and there was nothing I could do to take it back. "I never meant to hurt you," I said, my voice shaking. "I love you, Emily. Please, you have to believe me." She laughed bitterly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Love? You call this love? You've destroyed everything, Jason. I don't even know who you are anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but before I could say anything else, she turned and stormed out of the kitchen. My legs felt weak, and I stumbled after her, but she was already gone, disappearing down the hallway toward the front door. I froze, my heart pounding, my mind racing with panic. What was I supposed to do now? How could I fix this? Behind me, the twins stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. They looked as shocked as I felt, but I couldn't deal with them right now. My entire life was falling apart, and it was all my fault. The dinner party ended abruptly after that. Emily had left without saying another word, and the guests, sensing the tension, awkwardly excused themselves. I didn't even have the energy to see them out. All I could think about was Emily, where she had gone, what she was feeling, and whether I had lost her for good. Once the house was empty, I sat on the couch, my head in my hands. I couldn't believe what had just happened. How had it all gone so wrong? I had made one terrible decision, one night of weakness, and now my entire life was unraveling before my eyes. The twins stayed behind, standing near the front door as if they weren't sure what to do. "I didn't think she'd find out," Lucy muttered, crossing her arms over her chest. Lydia looked equally unsettled, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "We didn't mean for this to happen," she added quietly. I shook my head, barely able to process their words. It doesn't matter. I ruined everything. For the first time since that night, I realized just how far I had fallen. I had let my desire and my selfishness get the best of me, and now the person I loved most in the world was paying the price. I stood up, running a hand through my hair as I tried to think. I need to find her, I muttered, more to myself than to the twins. You should give her space, Lucy said softly. Let her cool down. But I couldn't do that. I had to fix this. I had to at least try. Ignoring the twins, I grabbed my phone and keys and headed out the door. Emily hadn't taken the car, so she couldn't have gone far. I drove around the neighborhood, my heart pounding in my chest, looking for any sign of her. I didn't know where she would go, but I couldn't just sit at home and do nothing. After what felt like hours of searching, I finally found her. She was sitting on a bench in a nearby park, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. My heart broke at the sight of her, and for a moment, I didn't know if I had the right to approach her. I had caused this. I had caused her pain. But I couldn't leave her like this. I got out of the car and walked over to her, my steps slow and hesitant. Emily. She didn't look up, but I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. I stood there, feeling completely helpless, not knowing what to say. Go away, Jason, she whispered, her voice filled with raw emotion. I can't, I said quietly, sitting down beside her on the bench. I can't leave you like this. She finally looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. You don't get it, do you? She said, her voice trembling. You've already left me. The moment you slept with them, you left. Her words hit me harder than any punch, and I felt tears welling up in my own eyes. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I love you, Emily. I always have. Please, let me make this right. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. How do you even begin to make something like this right, Jason? You didn't just cheat on me. You cheated on me with 2 women, and they live right next door. I felt the weight of her words like a stone in my chest. She was right. I had made the worst mistake imaginable, and there was no easy way to fix it. I don't know how to make it right, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I want to try. Please, Emily, don't give up on us. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her expression a mixture of hurt, anger, and exhaustion. Finally, she stood up, wiping at her tears. I need time, she said, her voice hollow. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but right now, I just need time. And with that, she walked away, leaving me alone on the bench, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Emily's words echoed in my mind as I sat alone on the park bench, watching her walk away into the fading evening light. I need time. She hadn't said she was leaving me, but she hadn't said she was staying either. I was stuck in limbo, trapped between hope and despair. After she left, I stayed at the park for what felt like hours, replaying everything over in my mind. I couldn't figure out where it all had gone wrong. Of course, I knew the exact moment, the night with the twins, but it seemed like there was so much more leading up to it. The distance between Emily and me that had grown over the years. The temptations I thought I could resist but couldn't. All the little cracks in our marriage that finally broke apart with one terrible decision. I eventually dragged myself back home, where the house felt unbearably quiet. The twins, Lucy and Lydia, had left, and I was grateful for that. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to be reminded of what had happened. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space Emily had occupied just hours earlier, and tried to figure out what to do next. Days passed, and Emily remained distant. She didn't come back home that night or the next. She stayed with a friend, telling me through brief texts that she needed space, that she wasn't ready to face me yet. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that she was still talking to me, but dread that every message might be the one where she told me it was over. The guilt consumed me. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, just went through the motions of daily life like a ghost. I avoided the twins at all costs. I couldn't bear to face them, not after everything that had happened. But avoiding them wasn't enough to quiet the turmoil inside me. I couldn't escape the regret, the overwhelming realization of how deeply I had betrayed my wife. About a week after Emily had left, I received a text that gave me the smallest glimmer of hope. "Emily, we need to talk. Can we meet tonight?" My heart leaped into my throat as I read the message. I wasn't sure if she was ready to give me another chance, or if this was the conversation where she'd tell me she was done. Either way, I had to face it. I couldn't run from the consequences of my actions any longer. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop, the same one we used to go to when we first started dating. As I sat waiting for her, my hands trembling around the coffee cup, I thought about the years we had spent together. The good times, the laughter, the way we used to look at each other like nothing else in the world mattered. And now it felt like all of that was slipping away. When Emily finally walked in, my breath caught in my throat. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, but there was still that undeniable strength in her eyes. She sat down across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was thick with tension, and I didn't know how to break it. I had rehearsed 1,000 things to say, but now, sitting in front of her, none of it felt like enough. Emily was the one who finally spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "About us, about what happened. And I still don't know if I can ever forgive you, Jason." Her words were a dagger to the heart, but I knew she was right. How could she forgive me? I had broken the most sacred promise between us. "But," she continued, her eyes meeting mine for the first time, "I'm not ready to throw away everything we've built. Not yet." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, a small flicker of hope igniting in my chest. "Emily, I know I've messed up, worse than I could ever imagine, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I love you, and I'm not going to give up on us." She nodded slowly, but there was still pain in her eyes. "It's not going to be that simple. We can't just go back to how things were. You've broken my trust, Jason. I don't know how long it's going to take to fix that, or if it ever will be fixed." "I'll wait as long as it takes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll go to counseling, I'll do whatever you need. I just want to make this right." Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting around the edge of her coffee cup. "I don't know what I need right now. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I'm willing to try. For now." Her words were tentative, filled with uncertainty, but they were more than I had hoped for. She wasn't giving up on us, not yet. We talked for a while longer about everything we needed to work through, about how we could move forward. There were no easy answers, no guarantees that things would ever go back to the way they were. But the fact that she was willing to talk, willing to try, gave me the hope I so desperately needed. As we left the coffee shop that night, I felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Rebuilding a marriage after infidelity isn't like flipping a switch. It's a long, painful process filled with doubt, anger, and tears. Emily and I agreed to start counseling, both individually and as a couple, to work through everything that had happened. The first few sessions were brutal. Emily was still hurt, and rightfully so. She had every reason to be angry with me, and she didn't hold back in expressing that. There were moments during those sessions when I thought it might be easier for her to walk away, that maybe we were too broken to fix. But despite the pain, she showed up every week, and so did I. The twins, Lucy and Lydia, had disappeared from our lives. After everything had come to light, they stopped coming around. Emily made it clear she never wanted to see them again, and I agreed. The idea of facing them again filled me with nothing but regret and shame. Slowly, day by day, Emily and I began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when she would wake up crying, the memory of my betrayal too fresh to ignore. There were days when I could see the doubt in her eyes, when I wondered if she would ever be able to trust me again. But through it all, we kept trying. We took small steps, talking more openly, spending time together, trying to find the connection that had been lost. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. The scars of my infidelity would always be there, but I was determined to prove to Emily that I was worth fighting for. Months passed, and though things were still fragile, there was a shift between us. We started to laugh again, to find moments of joy in the little things. The tension that had once filled our home began to fade, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to me, her expression soft but serious. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you, Jason," she said quietly, "but I do love you, and I'm willing to keep trying." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I knew we weren't out of the woods yet, but the fact that she was still here, still fighting for us, meant everything. "I love you too," I whispered, taking her hand in mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The relief I felt after Emily said she was willing to keep trying stayed with me, but so did the guilt. I knew the road ahead was going to be long and uncertain, but I was committed to fixing what I had broken. The real question was whether Emily could ever fully trust me again, and if I could ever forgive myself. The first few months after we agreed to work on our marriage were filled with ups and downs. Some days felt almost normal. Emily and I would talk, laugh, and even share a moment of peace together. But other days were brutal. There were nights when Emily couldn't even look at me without pain flashing across her face. There were moments when I'd catch her staring at me, her eyes full of suspicion, and I knew she was wondering if I was still lying to her. We kept going to counseling. It was helping, but it was also hard, harder than I expected. Emily had a lot of anger, and she wasn't holding back anymore. In one of our sessions, she finally let it all out. "I keep wondering if I'm stupid for trying," she admitted, her voice shaking with emotion. "You hurt me, Jason. You betrayed me in a way I never thought you could. How do I know this won't happen again? How do I know you're not going to get bored or tempted again?" I felt her words like a punch in the gut, but I didn't blame her for feeling that way. She was right to question me. I had given her every reason to doubt me. "I can't change what I did," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm going to spend every day proving to you that I've learned from my mistake. I'll never take you for granted again." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, but I could see the doubt. She wanted to believe me, but trust isn't something that just comes back overnight. Still, we pressed on. Emily started to open up more about her feelings, and I forced myself to face the reality of the damage I had done. In those early days, I realized that healing wasn't just about convincing Emily to stay. It was about rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. We couldn't just patch the cracks. We had to tear down the walls and start over. Even as things between Emily and I slowly improved, the shadow of the twins still lingered. Lucy and Lydia had been a part of our lives for months, and now they were a glaring reminder of my betrayal. I hadn't seen them since the night everything fell apart, but knowing they were still living next door made it impossible to fully escape the past. Emily had made it clear she never wanted to see them again, and I, of course, was more than happy to avoid them. But every time I left the house, there was a part of me that expected to see one of them, and the anxiety gnawed at me. One afternoon, Emily and I were out in the backyard, working on the garden, when it happened. I saw Lucy first. She was walking out of her house, heading toward her car, and for a split second, our eyes met. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen her since the night everything came crashing down, and I felt a surge of panic. I turned quickly, pretending to focus on the flowers, praying that Emily hadn't noticed. But she had. Emily froze beside me, her eyes locked on Lucy. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the tension between us thick and suffocating. I could feel the anger radiating off her, and I braced myself for the storm that was about to hit. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold and sharp. "I can't believe they're still here." I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I know. I wish they weren't." Emily's jaw tightened, her hands trembling as she dug into the soil. "Every time I see them, I remember what you did. I remember how you lied to me, how you made me feel like a fool." "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling utterly helpless. "Sorry doesn't erase what happened," she snapped, standing up and wiping her hands on her jeans. "Every time I look at them, it's like a slap in the face. I can't escape it, Jason. I can't escape them." I stood up as well, reaching for her, but she pulled away, her eyes blazing with anger and pain. "Maybe it would be easier if we moved," she muttered, her voice trembling. "I can't live like this. I can't live next to the women you cheated on me with." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I knew she was right. As long as Lucy and Lydia were around, the past would always be lurking in the background, threatening to unravel everything we had worked so hard to rebuild. But moving, that felt like running away, felt like admitting defeat. "We'll figure something out," I said softly, unsure of what that even meant. But I wasn't ready to let go of the life we had built here. Not yet. Emily didn't respond. She just turned and walked inside, leaving me standing there, once again feeling like everything was slipping through my fingers. The idea of moving gnawed at me over the next few weeks. Emily hadn't brought it up again, but I knew it was on her mind. I could see it in the way she avoided the backyard, the way her mood shifted whenever we passed by the twins' house. It was like the entire neighborhood had become tainted by my betrayal. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, I finally decided to bring it up. "Emily, about what you said, about moving." She looked up at me, her expression guarded. "I know things are hard right now," I continued carefully, "but I don't want to make any rash decisions. We've put down roots here. The kids love their school, and we have a life in this neighborhood." Emily set her fork down, her eyes darkening. "A life that you've destroyed." I winced, but I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. "I know," I said quietly, "but moving doesn't solve everything. We can't just run from this. No matter where we go, the past is still going to follow us. We have to face it." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly. "I don't know if I can face it, Jason. Every time I see them, I feel like I'm being ripped apart all over again." My heart ached as I watched her struggle with the pain I had caused. "Maybe we can talk to them," I suggested, though the thought made me sick to my stomach. "Maybe we can ask them to move." Emily looked at me, shocked. "You want to ask them to move?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling like I was grasping at straws. "But I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I don't want to leave this place, but if it's the only way for you to heal, then I'll consider it." She didn't respond immediately, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "I just want this nightmare to end," she whispered. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "I know, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you through this. We'll figure it out. Together." For the first time in weeks, she didn't pull away. She squeezed my hand, her grip firm but fragile. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. The idea of confronting Lucy and Lydia terrified me. I hadn't spoken to them since the night everything came crashing down, and the thought of facing them now felt like reopening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. But Emily needed closure, and I was willing to do whatever it took to give that to her. The next day, after wrestling with the decision all morning, I finally worked up the courage to go next door. I knocked on the twins' door, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. Was I really about to ask them to move? Was that even fair? Lucy opened the door, her expression unreadable. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us like a dark cloud. "Jason," she said quietly, stepping aside. "Come in." I hesitated for a second, but then stepped into their house. It felt strange being there again, knowing what had happened inside these walls. Lydia appeared a moment later, her eyes wary. "We didn't expect to see you." I nodded, feeling the tension thick in the air. "I didn't come here to start anything," I said quickly. "But we need to talk." They exchanged a glance, then nodded for me to continue. "I need you to understand what your presence here is doing to my wife," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She can't move on as long as you're here. Every time she sees you, it's a reminder of what happened. It's tearing her apart." Lucy looked down at the floor, her expression somber. Lydia crossed her arms, looking more defensive. "We didn't ask for this either," Lydia muttered. "You made your choices, Jason." "I know I did," I said sharply, the guilt rising in my chest again. "I take full responsibility for what happened, but I need to fix this. Emily and I are trying to rebuild, and I can't do that if she's constantly being reminded of the past." There was a long silence, the air between us heavy with unresolved tension. Finally, Lucy spoke. "So, what are you asking us to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But if there's any way you could give us some space, maybe move." "Move," Lydia interrupted, her voice incredulous. "You're asking us to move because of something you did?" I felt a wave of frustration. "I know it's not fair. I know I'm the one who messed up. But I'm asking you, for the sake of my marriage, to consider it." Lucy and Lydia exchanged another glance, their expressions hard to read. Finally, Lucy sighed. "We'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I left their house feeling more conflicted than ever. I had no idea if they would actually move, but at least I had tried. Now, all I could do was wait and hope that Emily and I could find a way forward, together. After my conversation with the twins, the days that followed were tense. Emily and I didn't talk much about what had happened, but I could tell she was waiting, hoping for some kind of resolution. Whether the twins would actually move or not remained a question that hung over us like a dark cloud. Despite the uncertainty, Emily and I were slowly finding our rhythm again. It wasn't easy. Some days were good, where we'd talk or even laugh like we used to, and other days were hard, filled with silence and the weight of everything still left unsaid. We continued our counseling sessions, and they were helping, at least to some degree. Emily was beginning to open up more, talking about her hurt and anger in a way that she hadn't before. It was painful to hear, but I knew it was necessary. Healing couldn't happen without addressing the raw truth. One evening, about a week after I'd spoken to Lucy and Lydia, Emily and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie in silence. I could tell she was distracted, her mind somewhere else. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, not wanting to disrupt the fragile peace between us. Emily nodded slowly but didn't take her eyes off the screen. "I've just been thinking," she said after a long pause, "about everything, about us." My stomach tightened with anxiety, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What are you thinking?" She sighed, turning to face me, her expression more serious than I expected. "I know we're trying to work through this, and I know you're doing your best. But some days, it's still so hard. I still feel that pain, Jason. I don't know if it'll ever go away." I reached for her hand, hesitating at first, unsure if she wanted me to. When she didn't pull away, I held it gently. "I know it's hard, and I know it's going to take time. But I'm not giving up, Emily. I don't care how long it takes. I'll be here." She nodded, her eyes softening for a brief moment. "I don't want to give up either," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But I need you to understand that I'm not going to be okay overnight. There are days when I feel like I'm barely holding it together." Her words hit me hard, but I understood. I had caused this pain, and I had no right to expect things to go back to normal. "I get that," I said quietly, "and I'm here whatever you need." We sat in silence for a while, the movie playing in the background, neither of us paying attention. It wasn't the easy comfort we used to have, but it was something we were rebuilding brick by fragile brick. A few days later, just when I thought we were settling into a delicate balance, something unexpected happened. I was working in the garage when Emily came outside, holding her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. I immediately felt a surge of anxiety. Every time she came to me like this, it was as if I was bracing for bad news. "Lucy called me," Emily said, her voice steady but laced with surprise. I froze, wiping my hands on a rag. "What? Why?" "She said she wanted to talk," Emily continued, her brow furrowed. "She asked if she could come over." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Lucy had called Emily? Why would she want to talk to her? And after everything that had happened, why would Emily even consider it? "I told her she could," Emily added quietly, watching my reaction. My heart pounded in my chest. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Emily sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. "I don't know, Jason, but I feel like I need to hear her out. We've been avoiding them for weeks, and I think maybe this is the closure I need." I wanted to argue, to tell her that nothing good could come from talking to Lucy, but I stopped myself. If this was something Emily needed to move forward, I had no right to deny her that. "What did she say?" I asked carefully. Emily glanced down at her phone. "She didn't say much, just that she wanted to apologize. She said she didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." I wasn't sure if I believed that, but I kept my thoughts to myself. This wasn't about me, it was about Emily. "Okay," I said finally. "If you think it'll help, then I support you." Emily gave me a small, grateful smile, but I could still see the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't sure what she was getting into, and neither was I. That evening, Lucy came over. I was upstairs, pretending to give them space, but in reality, I was pacing the hallway, anxious about what was being said downstairs. Every sound made my heart race, and I couldn't help but wonder what Lucy was telling Emily, what lies or manipulations she might be spinning. I hated the fact that she had any control over this situation at all. After what felt like hours, I heard the front door close. I hurried downstairs, and there was Emily, standing in the living room, staring at the door where Lucy had just left. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tense. Emily turned to me, her face a mix of confusion and relief. "She's leaving," she said softly. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard her correctly. "Leaving? What do you mean?" "Lucy and Lydia are moving," Emily clarified, her voice trembling slightly. "She said they're leaving town. They want a fresh start." The news hit me like a wave of relief, but I was also cautious. "Did she say why?" Emily nodded. "She said she feels guilty. She admitted that what happened was wrong, and that staying here, it's just too much. For all of us." I wasn't sure what to say. On one hand, this was exactly what I had hoped for. The twins moving away meant that Emily and I could finally start to rebuild without the constant reminder of my betrayal living right next door. But on the other hand, I wasn't sure if I could trust Lucy's sudden change of heart. "And how do you feel?" I asked carefully. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes softening. "I feel like this is the closure I needed. I can finally breathe knowing they'll be gone. Maybe now we can really start to move on." Her words gave me hope, and I stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm glad," I whispered. "I just want you to be okay." Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. I don't know if I'll ever be fully okay, but I'm willing to try. That night, for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there was still a long road ahead of us. But with the twins moving away, it felt like a chapter in our lives was finally coming to a close. Over the next few weeks, the tension that had once filled our lives began to ease. Emily and I were still working through our issues in counseling, but there was a new sense of hope between us. The knowledge that Lucy and Lydia were leaving town brought Emily a peace she hadn't felt in months, and that peace slowly began to spread into our relationship. We still had difficult conversations. There were still nights when Emily would break down, the pain of my betrayal too fresh to ignore. But those moments were becoming less frequent, and the moments of connection between us were growing stronger. One evening, as we sat together on the back porch, watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a small, hopeful smile. "I think we're going to be okay," she said softly, her hand resting on mine. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. I think so too. It wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding trust after such a deep betrayal never is. But for the first time in a long time, I believed that we could make it. We had both been through hell, but we had come out the other side stronger, more honest with each other than we had ever been before. Lucy and Lydia left town a few weeks later. They packed up and moved, just as they had said, and with them went the last tangible reminder of the affair. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave us room to breathe, to focus on each other and the future we were trying to build. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Emily and I continued to heal. We spent more time together, talked more openly, and gradually the wounds began to close. The pain was still there, but it wasn't defining us anymore. One night, as we lay in bed, Emily turned to me, her voice soft and full of emotion. "I don't think I'll ever forget what happened," she said quietly. "But I love you, Jason, and I'm willing to keep fighting for us." Tears filled my eyes as I reached for her, pulling her close. "I love you too," I whispered, "and I'll never stop fighting for you." For the first time in what felt like forever, I knew we were going to be okay.